Hello, second grade Smarties, and welcome to Wit and Wisdom Module 2, the American West, Lesson 16. So we are going to start by talking about a new book. But before we do that, let's go over our questions that we're trying to answer. These are questions that are trying to build our knowledge of what we know about the American West. So our essential question, or our big pizza question, our whole pizza question, is what was life like in the West for early Americans? Our pizza slice question is a new question this week, and it is, what life lesson can we learn from the story of Blue Bonnet? And the pizza bite question we're going to take today is, what do you notice and wonder about the legend of the Blue Bonnet? All right, so this is the cover of our new book that we are going to be studying. It is called The Legend of the Blue Bonnet, an old tale of Texas, retold and illustrated by Tomie dePaola. So in the Ed Puzzle, I want you to take a second to look at the cover, and I want you to tell me, what is something that you notice about the cover on this book? Tell me in the Ed Puzzle. I notice that there is a girl with a doll, and I also notice that there are teepees. And in the Ed Puzzle, I want you to tell me, what is something that you wonder about this book? What is a question that you have about this book? I will model out loud. The question that I have is, where does this story take place? I also wonder, what is a legend? What is the legend? The legend of the Blue Bonnet. What's a legend? In the Ed Puzzle, I want you to tell me, what are you wondering about the cover? All right, so this is our timeline of what we know about the early American West. It starts from long ago, and then we moved into the 1800s, and in the 1800s, new people came west on the Oregon Trail. We learned about that with Olivia Clark. The early American government broke promises that caused Indian wars with the Native Americans. We also learned that Plains Indians were forced in reservations. We learned that as settlers started to farm on the plains, that the land dried up so nothing grew. The bison nearly died out. And then as time went on, President Roosevelt was one of the people in the 1900s that wanted to help the prairie become healthy again and to bring back the buffalo. But long ago, this is what we have so far in our timeline. Indians and buffalo lived together, and people came to the Great Plains. Looking at the cover of this book, I want you to think, do you think this book takes place long ago, in the 1800s, in the 1900s during the time of President Roosevelt, or do you think this story takes place in present time? In the Ed Puzzle, I want you to pick from the multiple choice. What time period do you think this story takes place? Does it take place long ago? Does it take place during the time of the early settlers, during the time of President Roosevelt, or today? All right, so what we are going to be doing right now is we are going to be listening to the book, The Legend of the Blue Bonnet. But before we get started with listening to this book, I want you to think, what do you think the word legend means? What do you think a legend is? A legend. I want you to tell me in the Ed Puzzle, what do you think the word legend means? So a legend is a story that is passed on through word of mouth and involves supernatural beings or forces related to a natural phenomenon. Legends are usually historical, but not factual. So this is a book that's going to tell us a story. It's not going to be a narrative nonfiction. It's going to tell us a story, and it's going to tell us a story using magical powers and usually about something in nature. So, a legend is a story that is passed down from generations. So, this is a story that has been passed down from different Native American tribes. So, what we are going to be doing is we are going to be listening to this story for the first time, and we are going to notice and wonder. So, here is our story, The Legend of the Blue Bonnet. Great spirits, the land is dying. Your people are dying too, the long line of dancers sang. Tell us what we have done to anger you. End this drought, save your people. Tell us what we must do so you will send the rain that will bring back life. For 3 days, the dancers danced to the sound of the drums. And for 3 days, the people called Comanche and watched. And the people called Comanche watched and waited. And even though the hard winter was over, no healing rains came. Drought and famine are hardest on the very young and the very old. Among the few children left was a small girl named She Who Is Alone. She sat by herself watching the dancers. In her lap was a doll made from buckskin, a warrior doll. The eyes, nose, and mouth were painted on with the juice of berries. It wore beaded leggings and a belt of polished bone. On its head were brilliant blue feathers from the bird who cried, Jay, Jay, Jay. She loved her doll very much. Soon, She Who Is Alone said to her doll, the shaman will go off alone to the top of the hill to listen to the words of the great spirits. Then we will know what to do so that once more the rains will come and the earth will be green and alive. The buffalo will be plentiful and the people will be rich again. As she talked, she thought of the mother who made the doll, of the father who brought the blue feathers. She thought of the grandfather and the grandmother she had never known. They were all like shadows. I wonder what that means, they were like shadows. It seemed long ago that they had died from the famine. The people had named her and cared for her. The warrior doll was the only thing she had left from those distant days. The sun is setting, the runner called as he ran through the camp. The shaman is returning. The people gathered in a circle, and the shaman spoke. I have heard the words of the great spirits, he said. The people have become selfish. For years, they have taken from the earth without giving anything back. The great spirits say the people must sacrifice. We must make a burnt offering of the most valued possessions among us. The ashes of this offering shall then be scattered to the 4 points of the earth, the home of the winds. When the sacrifice is made, drought and famine will cease. Life will be restored to the earth and to the people. The people sang a song of thanks to the Great Spirit for telling them what they must do. I'm sure it is not my new bow that the Great Spirits want, a warrior said. Or my special blanket, a woman added, as everyone went to their teepees to talk and think over what the Great Spirits had asked. Everyone, that is, except She Who Is Alone. She held her doll tightly to her heart. You, she said, looking at the doll, you are my most valued possession. It is you the great spirits want. And she knew what she must do. As the council fires died out and the teepee flaps began to close, the small girl returned to the teepee where she slept to wait. The night outside was still except for the distant sound of the night bird with the red wings. Soon everyone in the teepee was asleep, except she who is alone. Under the ashes of the teepee fire, one stick still glowed. She took it and quietly crept out into the night. She ran to the place on the hill where the great spirits had spoken to the shaman. Stars filled the sky, but there was no moon. "Oh, great spirits," she who is alone said, "here is my warrior doll. It is the only thing I have for my family who died in this famine. It is my most valuable possession. Please accept it." Then, gathering twigs, she started a fire with the glowing fire stick. The small girl watched as the twigs began to catch and burn. She thought of her grandmother and grandfather, her mother and father, and all the people, their suffering, their hunger. And before she could change her mind, she thrust the doll into the fire. She watched until the flames died down and the ashes had grown cold. Then, scooping up a handful, she who is alone scattered the ashes to the home of the winds, the north and the east, the south and the west. And there she fell asleep until the first light of the morning sun woke her. She looked out over the hill, and stretching out from all sides where the ashes had fallen, the ground was covered with flowers, beautiful flowers, as blue as the feathers in the hair of the doll, as blue as the feathers of the bird who cries, "Jay, Jay, Jay." When the people came out of their teepees, they could scarcely believe their eyes. They gathered on the hill with she who is alone to look at the miraculous sight. There was no doubt about it. The flowers were a sign of forgiveness from the great spirits. And as the people sang and danced their thanks to the great spirits, a warm rain began to fall, and the land began to live again. From that day on, the little girl was known by another name, one who dearly loved her people. And every spring, the great spirits remembered the sacrifice of a little girl and fill the hills and valleys of the land, now called Texas, with the beautiful blue flowers, even to this very day. All right, so that was the story, The Legend of the Blue Bonnet. In the puzzle, I want you to tell me what is one thing you noticed or heard in that story. One thing I noticed or heard was that our main character, she had a very interesting name, She Who Is Alone. So that was my notice. Now I have a wonder. Why did our main character not have a name? Or why was she alone? In the puzzle, I want you to tell me what you wondered in this story. After listening to the story for the first time, what do you wonder? When you are telling me your wonder, you need to think who was involved? What happened? When did it happen? Where did it happen? And how did it happen? In the ed puzzle, I want you to think of your question words: who, what, when, where, why, and how. In the ed puzzle, I want you to tell me what is a wonder you had. Another wonder I have is, why were the great spirits angry? What did the people do to make the great spirits angry? So I can't wait to see what your wonders are. Remember, noticing and wondering helps us think deeper about what we are reading and why we are reading it. All right. So in this book, we had some topic specific words. So there were a few words in this story that you might have heard before or you might not have heard it. There was a person in the book called shaman. And remember, in the story, the shaman was a Native American priest or healer. What did the shaman do in the story? What did he tell the people in the story? He told them that the great spirits were angry with them because they were selfish. So, shaman is a word we probably didn't know before learning the meaning of it. So, a shaman is a Native American priest or healer. What do you wonder about the word famine? It talked a lot about famine. What do you think a famine is? Tell me in the odd puzzle, what do you think a famine is? So in the book, it told us that people had starved, that they weren't getting rain. And if they were starving, that means they didn't have what? Enough food. So a famine is a shortage of or not enough food. What do you wonder about the great spirits? What do you wonder about them? It talked about them a lot and how they were angry with the people. What is something that you are wondering about the great spirits? Tell me in the Ed puzzle. And what did you notice about She Who Is Alone? What did you notice about the girl who the story was about? I noticed that she didn't have any family. I also noticed that she cared a lot about her warrior doll. What is something you noticed about She Who Is Alone? And talking about legends, remember, a legend is a story that is passed down that talks about nature using supernatural or magical elements. So, talking about the great spirits and how the people in the tribe had to sacrifice things that they loved to make the great spirits happy. So, this book taught us a lesson. We're not going to talk about what the main lesson is, but what are some things that you noticed were magical about this story? What is something magical or supernatural that you noticed in this story? Tell me in the puzzle. What is something magical you noticed in the story? All right. So, even though we are reading a book that is not an informational book, we can still, and Miss Mason's computer is being silly, we can still use topic specific words to understand more about the story. All right. So, here are some examples of some notices and wonders in the story. It talked about that there was a drought, no rain, like with the settlers in the 1800s. It talked about the buffalo being gone. Maybe this is not a long time ago. Ooh, that's a good notice. I think the bird is a blue jay. It cries J, 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 and the flowers were blue. Ooh, so they're using what they knew from the pictures and the words to guess that the bird was a blue jay. And here is a wonder. Why didn't anyone else volunteer to give up something they loved? What is the feathered circle hanging on the pole? Why does it say the people were like shadows? Ooh, I had that wonder too. Who was the shaman? And are blue bonnets a real flower in Texas? So, those are examples of notices and wonders that people had about this book. Maybe your notice and wonders were similar to those notice and wonders. All right, and we are going to wrap up this lesson with a deep dive. We are going to be talking about context clues of the words distant, thrust, and cease. So, whenever we come across a word that we don't know the meaning of, we have some strategies that we can use to figure out those words. We can look for words and phrases outside the word that gives us clues. So, when I was talking about the shaman, I talked about the pictures, I talked about what the shaman said, and we learned that the shaman was a priest or a Native American person who was the priest or a leader in a Native American tribe. We can look inside the word for parts of words that we know, like prefixes, suffixes, base words. We can look at the pictures for information. We can think about what kind of speech the word is. So, is it a noun? Is it a verb? Is it an action word? Is it a describing word? And we can replace that word with another word and think if it makes sense in a sentence. Remember, when we understand the meaning of a word, it has to make sense in a sentence that we write or read. So, looking at our thinking about our book, we had 3 words in this book that we can use those strategies. We can look outside the word to figure it out. We can look at the word itself and see if there's prefixes or suffixes. We can look at the base word and we can figure out if it's a noun, an action word, or a describing word. All right, so on page 7, it talks about, so in page 7 in our book, The Legend of the Blue Bonnet, there is a word that we are going to use the strategies to figure out what it means. It says, the people had named her and cared for her. The warrior doll was the only thing she had left from those distant days. So, distant is the word that we are trying to figure out the meaning of. So, when you are thinking about the word distant, it's describing distant days. As she talked, she thought of the mother who made the doll, of the father who brought the blue feathers. She thought of the grandfather and the grandmother she had never known. They were all like shadows. It seemed long ago that they had died from the famine. The people had named her and cared for her. The warrior doll was the only thing she had left from those distant days. So think about the pictures. Think about what we learned about her family in this section. So distant, if it's talking about the people that raised her a long time ago, those distant days, does that mean days that are far away or close? Distant means far away. So we could replace distant with the word far away to see if it makes sense. The warrior doll was the only thing she had left from those far away days. So from those days a long time ago. So we use the words around the word distant to help us understand the meaning. All right, and let's go to our next slide. All right, and now we're going to go to page 17. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Right. Now we are going to look at the word thrust. She thought of her grandmother and grandfather, her mother and father, and all the people, their suffering, their hunger. And before she could change her mind, she thrust her doll into the fire. Thrust. She thrust her doll into the fire. So I want you to think, thrust. If I thrust something, what does that mean? Is she doing something? So thrust is an action word. What did she do with her doll? She threw it, right? Thrust means to push hard or throw. So she pushed her doll into the fire. So we used our picture to help us understand what that word meant. All right, and our last page that we are going to explore is using the word cease. Say cease for me. Okay, it says, when this sacrifice is made, drought and famine will cease. When the sacrifice is made, drought and famine will cease. What do you think that means? What do you think the word cease means? Tell me in the puzzle, what do you think the word cease means? If something ceases, when the sacrifice is made, drought and famine will cease. Tell me what you think that word means in the puzzle. So think about the shaman when he was talking to the people in the village. He said that if they make a sacrifice, the drought and famine will stop, right? So if they made the sacrifice, the famine and the drought would stop. So when we are thinking about words that we do not know the meaning to, it's so important that we use our strategies to help us find the meaning of the word. Use the pictures, use the words around that word. Think if it's a noun, verb, or an adjective. Think about how you can use that word in a sentence to make it make sense. All right, Smarties, as always, keep that growth mindset. Good learners do hard things, and I will see you tomorrow with another video lesson. Bye, guys, and happy learning.